tell often the psychology of an individual or people in terms of their origins and early childhood experiences. You can look at then the psychology of a people in terms of their origins and early childhood of their race. And when we look then at the origins of this society, we must immediately recognize that it is a society founded on criminal activities. Yes, and that is its inheritance today. It is still a part of it. A society that is a crimogenic society, and a society that engages on white, on black violence, because it is founded on the murder and theft of Indian peoples and Indian lands. It is a crimogenic society, a criminal society, and a society that practices white on black violence, because it is a society founded on the kidnapping of African people, the manslaughter of African people in the Mid-Passage, the extortion from African people of their labor, and the enslavement of African people. Therefore, the very nature and foundations of this society rest on two massive genocidal crimes, and this original crime is a part of its nature today.
How do you talk about slavery? That was back there. Or you know, whites talk about that. Well, you know, that was back there. We don't have anything to do with that anymore. You see. And it's an amazing situation, because you have to remind them that you're still living off the interest of the wealth that your forefathers earned from slavery. You're still enjoying the accumulated wealth that began with the enslavement of our people. And if you're going to enjoy the wealth that was generated by evil, then you must take the curse that comes along with it. And therefore, even though you personally had nothing to do with it, but because you have received stolen goods, you must pay the price as well. And because you fight and struggle to protect those stolen goods, and you defend them, and you organize your society and your relationship to my people to maintain them and to continue to enhance them, then you must pay the price. That's why you live in terror.
Because this group of people cannot face their own criminality. They must engage in the psychology of denial and repression and distortion. And this denial and distortion and repression must suffuse throughout the total society, throughout its total institutions, throughout its total values, and therefore ultimately it must pervert its total population.
So we have a bunch of people out here who think they can rape and rob the world, and think that they could have enslaved the world, and think then that they are going to sleep well at night. It doesn't work that way. Look at the millions and millions of people who were destroyed. Look at the millions of bystanders who were destroyed as the Europeans struggled over gold, when they struggled over markets, and people who got caught in the crossfires. Yet, you see, if we forget the history of these people, we will be too quick to condemn our youth and forget the role that we play in the life that they lead.
The structuration of crime. That crime followed the type of violence that we talk about, or crime, even its nature, follows the class structure and follows the skills levels of criminals. You see? Why is there so much so-called violent crime in certain segments of the society? Because when you look at the skills levels of the people committing them, if they were to commit a crime, that's about the only crime they could commit. If they were accountants, they would commit the crime of embezzlement and steal hundreds of thousands or millions because they have a particular ability or skill.
There are some people who think that drive-by shootings were invented by black youngsters in the 80s. Yes. They think an interest in automatic weaponry was invented by black youngsters in the 80s and 90s. But as I've told you before, you sit up in front of your TV year after year after year, and you watched The Untouchables, and you saw drive-by shootings, Valentine Day Massacre. Have you ever heard of the Tommy gun? Then how can we say that the black youth are the first ones to exhibit an interest in automatic weaponry when these people shot innocent bystanders and themselves with this weaponry?
Sometimes I say the best way to win an argument is to concede to your opponent. Okay, there is a genetic marker for crime. Let's now look at the criminal record of African peoples and European peoples. The record is clear. If there is a genetic marker for crime, would we look at the fact that the European has committed a crime against every people on every continent, destroyed millions of people, then that argues for his genetic criminality. And that argues then for us to medicate him and control him. You know, the other thing I'm surprised at is we keep being surprised. We keep thinking that this is some new initiative.
And on top of looking at the law, you have to look at ecology and how the very structure and physical dynamics of the African American community, with this isolation from the rest of the American system, creates a crucible so that our youth fire at each other and kill each other. Yet we know that there are many more white drug addicts than there are blacks. And we know that there are many more white drug addicts who buy the products from our youth. But because they live in an ecological situation called the suburbs, and because the law is configured in such a way that if a black man stood in the midst of these neighborhoods, he would be immediately dispatched. We have a law enforcement system then that literally herds our young men into a confined space we call the ghettos. And they fight and fire at each other and terrorize our community. And yet we damn these youngsters without looking at how the whole organization of the country is set up to destroy them and us together.